Live, the vote the government never wanted but will win. In this hour, MPs decide the fate of Britain in Europe. Good evening. The government had hoped MPs would live with the result of June's referendum, but tonight the sovereignty of Parliament reigns supreme, even if it changes nothing. As we come on air, MPs are beginning voting on whether to trigger Article 50, pulling the United Kingdom out of the European Union. The government is expected to win easily. The Labour Party has in the last hour suffered 2 resignations from the shadow cabinet. Results are expected shortly.
Also tonight, 3 exclusive stories on the programme. First, we visit the house where UKIP leader Paul Nuttall claims to live in his Stoke by-election paperwork. No sign of Mr Nuttall or any of his things today. Has he made a false and potentially illegal declaration?
It's not a false declaration at all, OK?
Have you ever been to 65 Oxford Street?
No, I haven't. People are moving in for me.
You haven't even been there, and you've put that down as your home.
I've been knocking on doors, or as you know, all over the town.
Did the government cover up allegations of torture by the British Army in Northern Ireland? We talked to the man who says he was waterboarded at this primary school in the 1970s. And the Archbishop of Canterbury issues an extraordinary apology tonight after a Channel 4 News investigation into allegations of violent abuse by a church figure.
Also tonight, the government-funded housing scheme that promised to get first-time buyers onto the property ladder.
That's our plot, basically.
That's your plot?
Yeah.
Instead, it has left young families without their deposits and failed to finish a single home in 3 years.
Going forward, we just have to, we have prepared ourselves for the fact that we might have lost that money.
And how big a hit would that be for you?
Massive.
It's all happening as we speak. MPs are voting right now on the bill which will allow the government to start formal talks leading to the Brexit process. Within the last hour, 2 shadow cabinet members have resigned in defiance of Jeremy Corbyn's order to support the bill. Straight over now to our political editor, Gary Gibbon, in the central lobby. Gary.
Well, because of those Labour rebels, the tally on the side opposing this bill, which triggers Brexit, could be 100 or so. But against that, you've got to probably expect around 500 or so. So the result is not remotely in doubt on this vote. There will be amendments debated next week. There, you've seen today David Davis, the Brexit Secretary, pulling in potential rebels to have little cosy chats with them today. The government's obviously sufficiently worried to be going through that procedure, but I don't feel they're absolutely on the edge of their nerves about those votes next week as we speak. What did we learn today? Well, we did have a visit to a select committee from Ivan Rogers, the man who was our top man in Brussels but was slightly squeezed out of his job. And he said, amongst other things, that in Europe they feel that we, by departing Europe, have exploded a bomb under the EU budget, and that'll make them really dig their heels in over the bill they intend to slap on the table when Britain formally applies for Brexit. What else did we learn? We learned from George Osborne in a rare appearance in the Commons that he, on the basis of tours around Europe recently, thinks that the idea of getting some sort of hybrid negotiated success at the end of Brexit, where we have bits of the single market, bits perhaps of the customs union, he doesn't think that's really a runner. We learned that we're going to get a white paper tomorrow, but don't have great expectations of that telling you more than you know already. Mainly in this debate, what you saw were the agonies of the Labour Party yet again, this is the second day of debate, on display. And if it was for a party that is very much finds itself the MPs on one side, the supporters on another, a sort of therapy session for the Labour Party, I wouldn't say it was one that worked particularly well.
Vote to remain next Thursday on the 23rd. Thank you very much.
But when that day came, some 70% of Labour constituencies ignored the advice and voted leave, while 94% of Labour MPs backed Remain. Now, the debate triggering Brexit, which Labour wanted, has put Labour's agonies on display.
Labour stands for remaining in the European Union.
His constituency voted 72% to leave.
I think this referendum in part stemmed from a deep frustration about politics and the sense of disaffection from politics that there is in the country. And therefore, I think a heightened reason for saying that this process must begin is we do not want to give the sense that people having voted for Brexit because they felt they'd been ignored are being ignored once again.
And some people have accused me.
Tulip Siddique's seat did follow her advice to vote Remain, and she's defying the party whip and giving up her front bench job to vote against the bill.
In Hampstead and Kilburn, we do not wince when we hear people speaking in a different language on public transport. We do not blame the very real pressures on our health system, on our criminal justice system and on our housing by scapegoating others.
By contrast, most pro-Remain Tory MPs who backed the campaign to stay in have proved much more adaptable, sounding very much at home with the push for Brexit.
This House has a very simple decision to take. We gave the right of judgment on this issue to the British people. They made their choice. They want to leave the EU. The question every member must ask themselves as they go through the lobbies tonight is, do they trust the people?
Britain's top man in Brussels, who many felt was squeezed out of his job by her team at number 10, told MPs the negotiations with the rest of the EU would get brutal, descending to fistfights. And Theresa May's recent threat that she was happy to walk away from talks would be seen as hollow by the EU.
The implications for the UK of walking away without any deal on the economic side, without any preferential agreement, and walking into a WTO-only world are, from their perspective, which may be a misreading of us, so unpalatable that we won't do it.
George Osborne, openly dismissed by Theresa May from the cabinet, said her government had pushed economic well-being down its list of priorities.
The government has chosen, and I respect this decision, not to make the economy the priority in this negotiation. They have prioritised immigration control, and that was a clear message from the referendum campaign, and they've also prioritised removing European Court of Justice jurisdiction from the United Kingdom, and in that sense asserting parliamentary sovereignty, although I would point out that Parliament can choose to leave the EU, as indeed we are choosing to do in the coming days. So we're not prioritising the economy, although we hope for the best possible arrangement. The European Union is not prioritising the economy either in these negotiations. Having spent the last couple of weeks in Berlin and in Paris talking to some of the French and German political leaders, it is absolutely clear that while they understand that Britain is a very important market for their businesses, their priority is to maintain the integrity of the remaining 27 members of the European Union. They are not interested in a long and complex hybrid agreement with the United Kingdom. And so therefore both sides at the moment are heading for a clean break from the European Union for the United Kingdom.
Theresa May on her way to vote tonight, knowing that the misgivings of Remain supporters are for the most part trumped by the referendum result. And that means the government will get a massive majority tonight for the bill.
Well, we are waiting to hear the result of that first vote in the House of Commons, and we will bring it to you as soon as it happens, and we will have reaction. The MPs are going to troop out and talk to us live with their reactions. But first to some other news, because he's a candidate in the Stoke by-election, but did the UKIP leader Paul Nuttall break election law? He stated on his nomination form that his current home was an address in the constituency, which he admitted to this programme today he'd never even visited. Mr Nuttall can't be disqualified as a candidate before polling day, but were he to win the by-election, the result could be challenged in the courts. Our political correspondent Michael Crick is at the football ground where Stoke City are playing tonight. Michael.
Yes, and indeed they're playing Everton. But Paul Nuttall, of course, is a Liverpool supporter. Indeed, he lives on Merseyside. Now, these days, politicians, when they stand for parliamentary election, they don't actually have to put their specific address on the nomination paper or the ballot paper. They're allowed, if they're worried about security and terrorism and so on, they're allowed to put something more general along the lines of he lives in the county of Staffordshire or in Merseyside. But Paul Nuttall, remarkably, in this election, has decided that he is going to put a specific address here in Stoke-on-Trent. And presumably in order to impress the voters of Stoke that he's a local man and he lives locally. Now, Mr Nuttall could be in big trouble on this. He can't actually be disqualified between now and the date of the election on February the 23rd. The election has to go ahead with his name on the ballot paper. But if he was to win this election, then the result could well be challenged by one of the other parties on the grounds that he perhaps made a false declaration. This is the extraordinary story. A terraced home in Stoke-on-Trent, which currently has agents trying to let it. Peer through the windows and the house looks totally empty. Not a stick of furniture in sight. Yet UKIP leader Paul Nuttall gives this house as his home address on his nomination form for the Stoke by-election, and it'll appear on ballot papers. Have you seen Mr Nuttall here?
I haven't, no.
Have you seen anybody here?
Once. A viewing, that was it.
Right, and so what sort of state's the house in?
It's okay, yeah. It's been painted and whatnot, but...
Is there any sign of life there, though?
No, definitely not.
It's empty?
It's empty. I think it's empty, just empty property. I think it's up to rent, to be honest.
Well, I suppose it's possible he's living on a camp bed or something upstairs.
Yeah, he could be. Give him a knock.
But it says on your nomination form that you're living at 65 Oxford Street.
Yes, and I will be. I'm not now.
You're not
but
now?
I will. No, at the present moment in time, but I will be. I'll be going in there and I'll be there for the rest of the campaign.
Hang on a moment. You meant to put on the nomination form your home.
Yes.
That's not your home, is it? 65 Oxford Street.
It will be for the rest of
empty.
It will be for the rest of the campaign.
But it's meant to be your home.
It's not empty. It's not empty. People are in it now.
The law says that when you sign the nomination form, you're meant to put down your home at the time of the nomination form. That wasn't your home. Your home, as far as I'm aware, is Bootle or somewhere.
Yes.
So you put down the wrong thing on the nomination form.
No, I haven't. I'll be in there and I'll be there for the rest of the campaign.
Why put 65 Oxford Street down on the nomination form? Isn't that a deception?
No, I don't think it is.
You live in Bootle.
No, I don't think it is, because by the time people will vote, we're in the process of moving in there now. By the time people vote, I'll be in there.
What are you going to do if somebody makes a complaint?
About what?
About your false declaration.
It's not a false declaration, sir.
It is, because it's not your home.
No, it's not. It will.
Have you ever been to 65 Oxford Street?
It's not a false declaration at all, okay?
Have you ever been to 65 Oxford Street?
No, I haven't. People are moving in for me.
You haven't even been there, and you put that down as your home.
I've been knocking on doors, or as you know, all over the town.
And so you haven't even been to 65 Oxford Street, and you've put it on the nomination form.
People are in the process of moving us in, okay?
In a Stoke workshop, the careful finishing touches to a brand new pottery model called May Brexitania. The potteries voted 70% Brexit last year, and few seats look better for UKIP than Stoke-on-Trent Central in this by-election. What do you think is going to happen in this by-election?
I think UKIP are going to walk in.
Really? Why?
Because the mood in Stoke is that the biggest majority of people voted to leave the EU, and I would think they're singing the right tunes.
A sign of the mood here. Many on the street seem excited by the new, authentic leader. Not Nuttall, but Trump.
Well, I'm telling you that we need a Trump for this country because it's got out of hand.
A Trump for this country?
Mr. Trump, somebody like that, and I think he's involved with him. I'm not sure. Nuttall's with him, isn't he?
Never heard of him.
Nigel Farage, isn't it?
No, it's Paul Nuttall now. He's standing in this constituency.
Just switch from one to another. They're all jokers, a lot of them. Donald Trump, just let him rule everything. He's going the right way.
So you think he should become Prime Minister of Britain as well as President
everywhere.
of America?
Well, he's doing the right thing, and he's stopping terrorism and that, isn't he?
Paul Nuttall won the UKIP leadership, pledging to win over working-class Labour voters fed up with middle-class London leaders.
It's been described as the capital of Brexit. Let's make it the capital of change, because I tell you, if UKIP win this seat on February the 23rd, it could create a domino effect and we could go on and change British politics.
Labour are in big trouble. Their candidate, Gareth Snell, was a strong Remainer, but last week said this about how he'd have voted in tonight's debate.
There's a vote in Parliament next week of a second reading to trigger Article 50. If I was there, I'd be voting for that.
We've been trying to film with the Labour candidate, Gareth Snell, since 10 o'clock yesterday morning. Time and again, Labour officials have put us off. One of them told us he didn't like the idea of us going out canvassing with Mr. Snell because he didn't want a Gillian Duffy moment, a reference to the famous incident in 2010 where Gordon Brown was confronted by an angry member of the public on immigration. And certainly Gareth Snell has said some pretty controversial things in recent months on social media. He called Jeremy Corbyn an IRA-supporting friend of Hamas and called Brexit a massive pile of excrement, or a word to that effect. Their man, also elusive these 2 days, backed Remain too.
Yes, I voted to remain, but I think the government has been very clear that this is about, we're all Brexiteers now, and I think the government has been clear that this is about ensuring that we have a clear plan.
The Lib Dem vote dropped to barely 4% in 2015, but amazingly, their man's fighting again, now as the pro-single market candidate.
They all basically become Brexiters now, and they all are hell-bent to have a hard Brexit, which is going to affect trade and economy and jobs in this country, and that's what I'm standing against.
It's a campaign dominated so far by people not being where you'd expect them. Two main contenders barely visible, another not visible where he calls home. Well, a couple of hours after my confrontation with Mr. Nuttall about where he is or isn't living, UKIP rang me to say that now, this afternoon, he actually moved into that empty house and he's actually taken some bedding with him. But that doesn't really matter legally, it's too late. It's where he was living at the time of nomination that matters.
Thanks, Michael. And here is a list of all the candidates standing in the by-election later this month. John.
Back now to the House of Commons. MPs have just been voting on the SNP amendment to the Brexit bill, calling for Article 50 legislation to be abandoned. They've rejected it by a majority of 236.
The ayes to the right, 100. The noes to the left, 336.
That's interesting. There seem to have been a fair number of abstentions there, that majority, 236. And now they're actually voting on the second issue of the night, and that is the actual vote on whether to trigger Article 50 itself. Now, Donald Trump says he wants an elegant and dignified confirmation process for the man he's nominated to the Supreme Court. And he's threatened Democrats who try to block Neil Gorsuch. He could use the nuclear option, force a simple majority vote. If he's confirmed, Judge Gorsuch will restore the Conservative majority on the court with a say on key issues from abortion rights to gun control. Let's go live now to Washington to our correspondent, Kylie Morris. Kylie.
John, before we talk about the Supreme Court nomination, I should just mention something that's just happened at the White House briefing, where the National Security Advisor, Mike Flynn, has made a kind of sudden appearance, and he's come out to talk in very tough terms about Iran. He's come and criticised Iran in strong terms over its testing on Sunday of a medium-range ballistic missile and a Houthi attack on a Saudi naval vessel, presumably off Yemen. This is what he had to say.
The Trump administration condemns such actions by Iran that undermine security, prosperity, and stability throughout and beyond the Middle East, and which places American lives at risk. As of today, we are officially putting Iran on notice. Thank you.
Now, we don't have any further clarity on exactly what that means, but clearly America is watching. America is displeased. Iran should know that tough talk on Iran was a key issue in the Donald Trump campaign, as was appointing a conservative Supreme Court justice. He did that last night in Trumpian style and is now telling Republican leaders in Congress to do whatever it takes to ensure that his nominee is appointed. The president just couldn't help himself.
I would like to ask Judge Gorsuch
and his wonderful wife Louise to please step forward.
Never one to turn down a reality TV opportunity.
Here they come. Here they come.
He revealed America's new Supreme Court justice live on television like a season winner from Survivor.
So was that a surprise? Was it?
He declared himself delighted and hoped everyone else would be too, that he'd chosen just the kind of conservative judge that he'd promised.
Millions of voters said this was the single most important issue to them when they voted for me for president. I am a man of my word.
The appointment of Neil Gorsuch to replace Justice Antonin Scalia, who died last year, has delighted Republicans. They wanted a nominee who'd strictly interpret the Constitution, and that's exactly what they have.
A judge who likes every outcome he reaches is very likely a bad judge, stretching for results he prefers rather than those the law demands.
This is probably the most hopeful march that I've been a part of.
For those who joined last week's pro-life march in Washington, Donald Trump's Supreme Court pick was a key test.
That literally was my reason for voting for Trump, was a Supreme Court nominee. I want whoever he chooses to be as a pro-life.
Marching to oppose abortion rights, many wanted a conservative appointee who might help to overturn Roe versus Wade, the precedent-setting case that legalized abortion in the US.
Obviously, we would love to see Roe v. Wade overturned and continue this country in a direction that honors all life from beginning to end, from the moment of conception to the moment of natural death.
There'll be more arm wrestling ahead, though, to get this through Congress. Democrats, wounded by the Republican refusal to even hold hearings for President Obama's nominee, will move to prevent the appointment.
It's a very hostile appointment.
They wanted a consensus nominee and criticised the judge's record.
If you breathe air, drink water, eat food, take medicine, or in any other way interact with the courts, this is a very bad decision. Well outside the mainstream of American legal thought.
In the Roosevelt Room today, President Trump thanked those who worked with him on the appointment.
He's a very dignified man. I'd like to see him go through a dignified process.
No one at the table could stop smiling, from the guy from the National Rifle Association to televangelists and tax reformers. Grins all round as guns, God and gross profits help guide this president to his biggest hire yet, a judge for the highest court in the land.
Well, Donald Trump has drawn outrage across the world, including from Britain, after he condoned waterboarding and torture. But tonight, this programme can reveal allegations that waterboarding and electric shock torture were used by the Parachute Regiment against prisoners in Northern Ireland in the 1970s. And although the British government at the time was aware of the claims, it's alleged that defence officials covered them up. Our chief correspondent, Alex Thompson, reports.
In Belfast, they'd stayed silent for decades, but this week, after Donald Trump condoned torture and after the British government condemned it, they could no longer keep silent. Tonight, 2 victims of waterboarding right here in Belfast, more than a generation before the Americans had even invented the term, talk about their experiences for the first time. And we have new evidence from the highest levels of both British and Irish governments about what was going on. 1972 and the Paras are on the streets of Belfast. Bloody Sunday has just happened. Anger is raw. A period when torture, mistreatment and murder were being meted out by government forces and paramilitaries alike. A witness has told us that in August 1972, the Parachute Regiment commandeered this primary school in West Belfast to use as a centre for interrogation and torture. This man was just 17 when he was snatched by soldiers from the streets.
I was brutalised, a lot of physical beating, kicking, and then it progressed on to other forms of torture, and one which is being now described as waterboarding.
Even after all this time, he doesn't want his identity disclosed.
There was a cloth tied around my head, and I was held face down by the 2 soldiers, and water poured over the back of my head, which filled up the cloth, which was a sensation of drowning, although thinking back on it, it was more suffocation.
But you genuinely felt like, this is it, I'm going to die here.
Oh yeah, I was convinced of it.
He was then dumped back on the streets of the Ballymurphy estate where he'd been arrested. It was then a place of great tension, beaten, bewildered and broken after a few hours which changed his life. Tonight, for the first time, we can show that the Irish Prime Minister Jack Lynch told the British Prime Minister Edward Heath about the waterboarding. It was raised at the highest possible level at their Downing Street meeting in November 1972. In a secret minute of that meeting, Mr. Lynch raises concerns about the torture of yet another victim, this time a person with epilepsy.
He had been forced to lie on his back on the floor. A wet towel had been placed over his head and water had been poured over it to give the impression that he would be suffocated.
Even today, 45 years on, speaking openly is difficult. Another victim told us off camera just what happened after the army took him initially to Andersonstown police station. It's now a park.
My head was stuck into a bucket of water, held down, and then pulled out. Then, shortly thereafter, being put back in again on a number of occasions.
But he says he's still far more affected by another form of torture, electric shocks.
I remember being told to hold to sort of attachments, and behind me I could hear a machine, and I heard the noise of the cranking, and you scrunched up your hands, and suddenly you had this massive explosion across the centre of your head.
Declassified Ministry of Defence legal advice in this case shows the British authorities desperate to settle his complaint and avoid publicity.
I think we must accept Council's advice that he was assaulted.
It also notes the allegations about him
having been subjected to electric shock treatment and having his head immersed in water for prolonged periods of time.
He received compensation for what he'd suffered. There are other cases concerning electric shock torture. Again, we can now show they were regarded as credible by the Ministry of Defence themselves. This declassified MOD legal report on another case says the victim
alleges that he was subjected to electric shock treatment. Our counsel advises that there is no prospect of a meaningful defence to this.
The memo arrives at a devastating conclusion.
A court is likely to award exemplary damages to mark the improper use of executive power.
The improper use of executive power, words that resonate even in today's much changed Belfast landscape, according to the director of the Pat Finucane Centre, an Irish human rights organisation.
We need to remember torture is an absolute prohibition on all governments worldwide. It's the shortest statute in the European Convention on Human Rights, Article 3. It's the shortest because there is no way for any government ever to avoid allegations of torture. It always constitutes a crime and there's no statute of limitations.
And the victims themselves?
I was 17 years of age, technically a child, and this was done by the British Army and what they call a part of Britain. So it's not Afghanistan. It's not Guantanamo Bay. You know, it's technically a part of Britain, and this was British soldiers doing this to one of their citizens.
These people don't want punishments or retribution, but tonight's evidence will now add to existing controversy about the British Army's role in Northern Ireland.
And we've just received this statement from a spokesperson at the Ministry of Defence, which says the UK government considers torture or inhuman treatment to be an abhorrent violation of human rights and human dignity, and consistently and unreservedly condemns the practice. It would not be appropriate to comment further on specific allegations.
Well, now back to tonight's vote on the government's bill to trigger Brexit, and from Central Lobby in the House of Commons, we will be talking in a moment to Ian Duncan-Smith. Here is the scene in the House of Commons now. You can see they're jockeying up into their seats and sitting expectantly. We're waiting for the tellers to come forward and reveal the result, and the result will be of the crucial vote triggering Article 50, and there's no real doubt in it. Let's go to Ian Duncan-Smith. A very handsome majority against the SNP amendment. There are some more amendments next week, but they won't change the overall result. So what's your reaction? One wonders why this vote was ever delayed by the government, why you didn't want it in the first place.
Well, the government felt that they had the right to make that decision and to get on to the next phase of it, but that's water under the bridge now. The truth is I've just come through the lobby and I think this will be a very substantial vote. A very large number of Labour MPs were in the same lobby as the government, so I suspect this will be a pretty overwhelming result to give the right and power to the government to trigger Article 50. So, yeah, I suppose in a sense a very historic moment.
You must be relieved as a long-serving MP to have the sovereignty of Parliament restored.
Well, I am in many senses. You know, 25 years ago, as you know only too well, I decided to oppose the Maastricht Treaty. I didn't actually want to leave the European Union at that stage. It wasn't until later when I realised that the direction of travel from Maastricht was very much towards a supranational federal kind of union, which I didn't think would suit or match what the UK wants or the people wanted. So to that extent, you know, campaigning to leave and to win the vote and have the British people's decision now represented here in Parliament in this vote, I think is a very big moment. It's not a moment to gloat or crow, it's just simply a fact that the British people decided to do that. Now we have to try and get the best deal we can.
Have you felt at all chastened by some of the comments that Sir Ivan Rogers, the former ambassador to the EU, put before MPs this morning?
To be fair, I haven't actually seen them.
Well, he warned of some
exactly
extremely complex negotiations to come, which may well leave Britain in an extremely disadvantaged condition.
Well, in all negotiations, you can look at it from one end and look at it from the other. I simply take the view, having done many negotiations in business, you need very rapidly, when you get started, to lay your position out and then say to the other side, you know, what we should try and do is reach a deal that benefits both sides. That's the definition of a good deal. And if the European Union wants to make sure that they help provide jobs for the European Union, as the UK does, then they'll want to reach some kind of agreement with the United Kingdom over trade and access through financial services and cooperation. After all, we're not leaving Europe, we're just leaving the European Union. We want to continue with intelligence sharing, defence, support. You know, I've got a sister living in Italy, retired there, worked all her life in there. You know, I love many of these countries in Europe. It's not an anti-Europe vote.
Okay, if we could just hold on a moment, Ian Duncan-Smith. We're just going to the House of Commons. There we are. There are the tellers.
The ayes to the right, 498. The noes to the left, 114.
There we are. That's it.
498. The noes to the left, 114. So the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Unlock.
There we are. Well, Ian Duncan-Smith, that is obviously a very handsome result there as far as you're concerned. About what you expected?
I think pretty much so. I think there's clearly been a number of Labour MPs who voted against, but probably not as many as people thought in the first instance. I thought Keir Starmer made a very good speech yesterday in which he said this is about triggering Article 50, it's not about giving the government carte blanche, and I agree with him.
But
those
it is,
debates
of course,
will now go.
It is, of course, for him and for quite a number of other politicians, they've had to vote against the vote. I mean, for example, Keir Starmer, his constituency voted 75% in favour of remaining in Europe. He's had to neglect them and say goodbye, I'm sorry.
Well, has he neglected them? You know, I've always believed that we are sent here to exercise our judgment. And I think yesterday he made it very clear that in his judgment, and in many of the speeches I heard from many of the Labour MPs, and I've always taken the view you use your judgment because that's what they voted you for, you have to take what's best for the United Kingdom. And the United Kingdom as a whole voted to leave the European Union. And I think yesterday he said we must act on that. But, you know, we're not going to give the government a blank sheet. They're going to have to come back to the House. There's going to be debates. There's the whole of the repeal of the 72 European Communities Act. So, John, there'll be a lot more, you know, debating, negotiating, amendments, arguments, etc. over the next year and a half before the government finally even reaches a deal.
Let's put it brutally. Would you say that as of tonight, basically, Britain leaving Europe is a slam dunk?
Yes, I would say that the Prime Minister, I think, intends and hopes to go to the European Council on the 10th of March, having had Parliament say yes, and say to them, we are now triggering Article 50, we give you notice, let the negotiations begin. And 2 years from then, we will have gone.
Ian Duncan-Smith, thank you very much indeed for talking with us. Christian.
Now, the Archbishop of Canterbury has tonight issued an extraordinary apology after this programme presented him with allegations that teenage boys and young men were violently abused by a senior church figure here and in Zimbabwe. Let's go over to Kathy, who is at Lambeth Palace. Kathy.
Thanks, Chris. Yes, a few days ago, we went to Lambeth Palace with a series of allegations following the 6-month investigation we've carried out into a man called John Smythe, who's a prominent evangelical Christian and a barrister with ties to the Archbishop of Canterbury. Now, our investigation, which will be broadcast tomorrow night and Friday night, reveals allegations that a group of students from Britain's oldest public school, Winchester College, and Cambridge University were, it's alleged, violently assaulted at the home of John Smythe in the late 1970s. And for decades, these allegations were not reported to the police. But I managed to track down John Smythe. Do you think what you did was Christian?
I'm not answering any questions.
Why did these young men have to bleed for Jesus?
There's no question of that at all.
Well, we approached Lambeth Palace and asked if the Archbishop of Canterbury had known about the alleged abuse. And we were told that he wasn't aware at the time, but that he was told of allegations in 2013. And today we get this extraordinary apology from Lambeth Palace. They said, we recognise that many institutions fail catastrophically, but the church is meant to hold itself to a far, far higher standard. And we have failed terribly. For that, the Archbishop apologises unequivocally and unreservedly to all survivors. Now, I should also add that Winchester College has, within the last hour, also sent us a statement also apologising unreservedly, and we'll have all the details and our 2-part film starting on tomorrow's news.
Thanks, Catherine.
Now, the inquest into the Britons caught up in the massacre in Tunisia in 2015 has heard from a mother who lost her father, her brother and one of her 2 sons. Suzanne Richards said a part of her had also died the day her family was destroyed. The court heard how her 16-year-old son, Owen, who survived the terror attack, had tried to protect his grandfather lying alongside him as the gunmen closed in on them. Our Home Affairs correspondent, Darshna Soni, reports.
They had called it their boys' outing, but just 12 hours into their holiday in Tunisia, 3 of them were dead. Owen Richards was 16 at the time. He was meant to be celebrating the end of his GCSEs with his brother, uncle and grandfather. Today, the inquest into their deaths heard of the horrifying moments before the killings. Mr. Richards had been on a lilo in the swimming pool at the 5-star resort when he heard what he thought sounded like firecrackers. In fact, it was the attacker, Saifuddin Rizki, firing his gun, hunting for victims.
As they ran away, Owen Richards told how he tried to help his 78-year-old grandfather who kept falling over. The gunman chased them through the hotel. As he caught up with them, he raised his weapon. Mr. Richards said he closed his eyes. As he opened them, he was covered in blood. His grandfather said to him simply, "He got me."
As the teenager clung to his grandfather, Rizki shot him again at close range. Charles Patrick Evans, known as Pat, was a former magistrate who was devoted to his grandsons. His family describe him as made of the old stock, a true gentleman. He died alongside his son, 49-year-old Adrian Evans. And next to them, his grandson, Owen's brother, Joel. Mr. Richards tried to tell his brother to get up, but he said there was no life left in his eyes. 19-year-old Joel was a football referee and a youth volunteer with a promising career ahead of him.
That's yours?
Birmingham County FA have set up a memorial fund in his honour, which his brother helped to launch.
Right, my name's Owen. I'm here today to raise money for the Joel Richards Foundation Legacy Fund. Thanks.
Today, the coroner paid tribute to Owen Richards' extraordinary courage in trying to protect his grandfather. The inquest also heard from his mother, Susan Richards. Her moving evidence was a powerful reminder of the impact that the Tunisia attack has had on the lives of those left behind. She told the court that there are 3 empty chairs every Sunday for lunch. 3 empty seats at football matches. We feel, she said, like we've been cut in half. Darshna Soni, Channel 4 News.
Now, last night, this programme reported on the government's overdue strategy to tackle the lack of affordable homes. Tonight, Channel 4 News can reveal how a government-funded housing scheme promising to get first-time buyers onto the property ladder left young families without their deposits and has failed to finish a single home in 3 years. Simeon Brown has this exclusive report.
Meet Andrew and Holly, newlyweds who had a plan to buy their first home. Holly thought with government support.
That's our plot, basically.
That's your plot?
Yeah, that's our
But then their problems began.
It has long been a Conservative ambition to transform Britain into a nation of private homeowners. But it's no secret that there's a shortage of homes. As part of the government's plan to build hundreds of thousands of new homes and support first-time buyers, the Conservatives made a pledge to double the number of custom-built homes by 2020. And the last coalition backed this with a £30 million capital fund, accessed by just 8 developers. One of them was Site for Self-Build.
This is the promo for the Barnsley-based developer and its sister company Site for Investment. The scheme is simple. The government loaned the startup capital, and all the aspiring house buyer needs is a smaller deposit and a special mortgage for custom builds. Holly and Andrew signed up immediately with a £10,000 deposit for a house on a 23-plot site in Barnsley.
We've been together 10 years and we're just wasting money on rent. It seemed daft. So we've been trying to, most of the time we've been together, put together a deposit. It seemed a brilliant opportunity and we'd be silly not to go for it.
Or so Holly thought. She says the developer told them the build would take 6 months. It's been almost 3 years. The mortgage providers have pulled out, so a wave of buyers like Holly and Andrew requested their deposits back. They expected it to be returned in days. It's now been years and they are still out of pocket.
Every time you email them, they just say, it's in hand, you know, in a few weeks, and this has been going on for 2 years.
Do you ever expect to get your money back?
At this moment in time, no. I think that's going forward. We just have to. We have prepared ourselves for the fact that we might have lost that money.
And how big a hit would that be for you?
Massive, absolutely massive.
Holly is returning to the site in Barnsley, where work appears to have restarted. In response to our report, Site for Self-Build's sister company, Site for Investment, said the company has apologised to families like Holly and Andrew, saying a new schedule of work has been agreed with the government's Home and Communities Agency, which is now being implemented. And progress from now on should see completion of the site during the summer months of this year. The government's Home and Communities Agency also has questions to answer. Why did they back a company with no prior experience in custom house building? The HCA told Channel 4 News,
thousands of custom-built homes are being built successfully in schemes like this around the country. Each investment decision is subject to a stringent review process, and due diligence showed that there was a viable business plan in place. One of our remits is to support small developers, and the problems arose for Site for Investments when third-party funders withdrew their financing.
I still think the initial idea and the concept of it is really good. I'm just saddened by what's happened really, and that it's come to what it has.
The government's Home and Communities Agency told Channel 4 News that it's under no legal obligation to help couples like Holly and Andrew get their money back. But tonight, they and Site for Investment insist the refunds are finally on their way. Holly and Andrew had to use their wedding fund to buy somewhere else. So like the house they planned to build, their honeymoon is delayed and their debts have increased. But this story is bigger than them. And is a tale of the challenge government faces to get young families onto the property ladder.
Simeon Brown reporting now. Back to the House of Commons, where the government's Brexit bill has cleared its first hurdle after MPs voted in the last hour to give it a second reading. We're joined by Labour MP Rachel Maskell, who resigned tonight as Shadow Environment Secretary so that she could vote against. 114 people with you, Rachel Maskell. Was it worth doing?
Yes, absolutely. When I came into Parliament and took my oath of allegiance, I said that I would
do and act according to what my constituents want. My constituents voted overwhelmingly against leaving the European Union, and it was right that I didn't go and support a Theresa May Brexit, which is very different from a people's Brexit. So I felt it was the right decision to take tonight.
48% of the population who voted will be disappointed that Labour didn't stand with them.
Well, it's absolutely right that we do the will of local people. People have been crying out for their representatives in Parliament to stand by them and to speak for them, and I believe that's what the role of an MP is. So this evening I have listened to the people of York, my constituency, and I have stood firm by them and voted against triggering Article 50 because I believe Theresa May is acting autocratically in the way that she is taking this forward. The question of leaving the single market was never put to the British people, and yet she's determined to do that.
Well, now, the Labour Party itself seems to be in complete disarray tonight. What does this really say about Jeremy Corbyn's leadership?
Different leaders make different decisions about the whipping arrangements that they put on, but I think what has really come through tonight is that we have the ability in Parliament to represent the people that have put us here, and surely that's what our democracy must be about. That's certainly why I came into politics, is to make sure that people's voices were echoed within the archaic system that we often having to work in here, and to make sure that we change politics to be in touch with what local people want.
Will you now have to toil, as it seems, in a party that is now a pro-Brexit party? Labour is now a pro-Brexit party after tonight.
Labour is absolutely clear. We do not support a Theresa May Brexit, a hard Brexit, which will be damaging for jobs, damaging for employment rights, damaging for the environment, climate change, and all the really important things. We want a strong relationship with Europe as we move forward, and that's certainly what we will be working for.
Do you see yourself returning to the front bench?
I'm going to continue representing the people that put me here, and I'm determined to do that in the future.
Rachel Maskell, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Thank you. Christian.
Coming up, from Brexit to Trump, the long march of populism has only just begun. What does this mean for our culture, our communities, our place in this fast-changing world? Join us after the break.
Welcome back, and tonight's main news is that the government's bill giving the Prime Minister the power to trigger the Brexit process will now move on to its second reading after an overwhelming support from MPs. An SNP amendment to scupper the legislation altogether was rejected. 2 shadow cabinet members resigned from Jeremy Corbyn's front bench team so that they could vote against the bill. Let's go back to the Commons, our political editor Gary Gibbon. Gary.
Well, there could be some surprises ahead. Despite the massiveness of this majority, there are still some amendments in play which Labour and Tory rebels, the SNP and others are hoping they can coalesce around to tweak things a bit next week. The most important of those is trying to get what is called a meaningful vote. So a vote on the negotiations when they proceeded quite a distance but haven't absolutely been signed off, so that they could effectively send the Prime Minister back with a slightly different mandate in presumably very different economic circumstances. It's a long shot. A lot of these things are a long shot. The fundamental vote has gone the way it has, and it is a massive majority. I've just been talking to Labour MPs who've been pinching their nose as they went through voting for Brexit, something they passionately don't believe in. One of them said, "I'm going to have a bath after all this filthiness." And on the other side, walking past them breezily, the sort of people they used to put in entanglements in the Tory party, saying this is a wondrous moment. One of them compared it to the execution of Charles I, a bit bizarrely perhaps. You get the idea.
Gary Gibbon at Westminster. Christian.
Well, I'm joined now from Chicago by the novelist Irvine Welsh, and the writer and commentator Rachel Johnson is here in the studio. Rachel Johnson, how do you think British politics have risen to the challenge after the referendum?
I think it's sunk to the challenge, hasn't it? Because these poor MPs have got this sort of Burkean challenge, which is that, you know, who do they represent? Their consciences, the country, the party, their constituents. And what we've seen tonight is some of them have voted with their party, some of them voted with their constituents. I mean, I've just been in Westminster and I bumped into an MP who said, "I'm going to vote against triggering Article 50 because my constituency in Liverpool was 75% Remain." It's all over the shop. And did we expect anything to be different after a knife-edge referendum like we had?
Irvine Welsh, what have you made of it looking in? You know, has Britain been able to respond to this massive challenge of the referendum result and the wave of populism that has gone with it?
Not really, and it is a mess, and there's kind of no way out of it, but I think we are kind of reaping what we've sown for the last 35 years. I mean, it's for a lot of people in the kind of, you know, the media classes, like myself, this is a big kind of sort of horror and tragedy now, but for a lot of ordinary working people, the horror and tragedy has been kind of lasted for 30 years, and this is the kind of manifestation of that. We have to kind of develop a politics that doesn't just transfer all the wealth of a nation, all the wealth of the globe to a very, very narrow elite, and we've failed to do that, and people are protesting, and our system, our creaky, battered old political system just can't cope with these kind of changes.
I mean, the trouble is, Rachel Johnson, that people have come to very different conclusions about what has caused this. You know, some people think it's about inequality and about people being, you know, the majority of people being too poor. Others think it's about control and immigration and people being frozen out. There is no real sense of what's caused it.
Well, I don't think there is one single cause. But as somebody said tonight, you know, a vote that was really triggered by deep concern about immigration and the unfairness of the capitalist system, how if capitalism doesn't work, we don't want socialism in this country, so we've got populism has risen up to occupy the middle ground in a way that I think surprised everybody. But I think the real horror and tragedy is that the Brexit will not deliver for the people who voted for it, the golden sunlit uplands, the brave new world that everybody expects. I mean, for a start, we haven't had any negotiations yet, and as Ivan Rogers said, the players aren't even on the pitch. They voted, it was like, let's say you said, we've got a house together, you want to sell the house, you want me to move into the house without having seen it. That is the situation this country is in. We haven't seen the house yet, and we're moving in.
I mean, but it wasn't it the logical conclusion of the work of people like your brother, Boris Johnson, who wrote one thing 1 minute and then campaigned, another way another minute. You know, our politicians didn't know what they really wanted.
In his defence, he, I think, cleaved to the whole notion of Brexit because he was passionately concerned about sovereignty. He believes in taking back control. And today is probably a great day for him as well. You know, as Jacob Rees-Mogg put it, it's a cross between Agincourt and Waterloo. Well, I don't think so. It's more like Dunkirk.
Well, explain.
Well, I just think we're going to have... Article 50 is now going to be triggered by an overwhelming majority. I think that's right. I think this is what the country voted for. But we still don't know what we're going to get when we leave the EU. And my argument is the country needs to have a second look. Parliament needs to have a second look at whatever the deal is, not just a vote, a veto.
Irvine Welsh, how do you think this is changing us?
Unfortunately, we can guess what we're going to get. You know, within this new world order, we can guess what we're going to get, and Theresa May's visit to America with Trump kind of gave it away to an extent. I mean, we have a system now whereby every nation is falling back in this very imperialistic, entitled nationalism, looking after their own interests. And if you think you're going to get a good trade deal with America, with a zero-sum negotiator like Trump, I mean, America first means America first. It doesn't mean America first and then a little bit for Britain. It's a winner-takes-all mentality, and this whole kind of ethos is going to spread throughout the globe, and it's not going to be good for a debtor nation like Britain to be in that position.
And are you fearful of what this wave of nationalism could mean? On the streets, for example, are we going to see... I mean, you know, a lot of people are genuinely afraid that we're going to see a new era of violence. You know, maybe not a world war, but of civil strife, racial violence, all of those kinds of divisions. Do you see that?
Well, when you get a nationalist and imperialist mentality, the next thing you get is trade wars, and the next thing you get is kind of conflict and wars spreading after that, and you get the kind of the wars of distraction to keep people on side with the whole nationalistic project. So I think, yeah, I mean, I think it's a strong possibility that you're going to get more of this stuff emerging.
Just very briefly, Rachel Johnson, I mean, do you fear that too?
What I fear is today's the day we've decided that Britain is going to leave Europe. just at the time when I think Europe should be uniting against what is a very worrying situation across the Atlantic.
Rachel Johnson, Irving Welsh, thank you both very much indeed. John.
And that's it from us tonight. That's all we've got time for until 7 tomorrow night. That's Channel 4 News. Have a great evening.